Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at nun danket al und bringet and I want to apologize in advance. I do not have a lot of time to record today, but this is the only time that I have, so I need to go through this chorale briskly. But that being said, there are some interesting attributes. The chorale obviously has a very fascinating visual profile just by looking at it first glance. You know, there's rests at the beginning, which are particularly unusual, and there's a high density of eighth notes in proportion to quarter notes and longer note values. So with that in mind, let's hop into the analysis. 1 sharp in the key signature, we start on G and we end on G major. So I think it's safe to say we're in the key of G major, and even though we have G going to D here, there are 2 flutes and 2 horns that are playing along with this as well, and I do have the score here with the entirety of the instrumentation to verify if there are any interesting harmonic shenanigans going on that are solved by those instruments, because I have not had that in the past. In this case, there is not. I think we can just imply, or infer rather, that there is a 1 chord here. We then have D, A, F sharp, and D. It's D major, which is our 5 chord. And then we have G, B, G, and D, which is our tonic triad and root position, with a couple of passing tones in the lower voices. We have B, D, G, and D, which is our tonic in first inversion, G major over B. This G is a chord tone, and this F is a passing lowered 7th, which means that the function of this tonic triad is changing. It is now turning into 5/7 of 4, because G also happens to be the dominant of C, and C is our subdominant in the key of G major. And then we kind of go there. We go to C, D, E, and E. I think we can make the argument that this is a 4 chord, but there's also a strong argument for the fact that because this D is a 2/1 or a 9/8 suspension over the bass, by the time we get to C, A gets introduced here in the bass. So I think we can also make the argument that even though I'm going to call this A a non-chord tone, and we could call this a 2 chord off this beat right here, we could make the argument that this is also some sort of 2 chord, making this 5/7 to 2 a secondary deceptive progression, which, if you've been following the last couple of videos especially, this has been a regular theme in Bach's harmonic writing over the last like 4-ish chorales that I've analyzed. So definitely possibility here, but as we get closer to the cadence, the texture gets much more contrapuntal, typically speaking, so we have to broaden our viewpoint on what possibly could be happening harmonically. We then have D, B, F sharp, and D. A couple of ways you can analyze this too. I'm going to analyze this as a 3 chord B minor with a neighbor tone, a little brief decorative neighbor tone here. Before, on the offbeat, this D is a chord tone, so we won't mark it. This A is a passing tone, this C is a passing tone, and this F sharp is also a chord tone, making this a D7 chord, which is another 5/7 chord in the key of G major, and then we cadence on 1 for an authentic cadence, more specifically an imperfect authentic cadence. So I think for the same reason why you could say that this 4 chord goes to 2 here, even though I'm choosing to omit that because I'm looking at the bigger picture, this 3 is going to 5/7 because this isn't really functioning like a suspension. It would be kind of I think it would be a little bit harder of an argument to be made 3/5/1. Now that I say that, maybe it's not as hard of an argument as I thought. Either way, this really actually no, I'm gonna walk that back. Actually, I'm gonna walk it back. Apologies. I'm gonna call this a 5 chord, actually, not a 5/7. We're gonna call that a passing. We're gonna call this B an accented non-chord tone, and we're just going to call it a 5 chord. Because, like I said, it gets contrapuntal, and I feel like this is the general gist. Sorry for delaying my my final analysis. I had to talk myself through it. I had a very in-depth chord progression in my notes, but as I was talking myself through it, I really needed to get to that conclusion so that I could have a better outlook on the rest of the chorale, because it is very contrapuntal, and sometimes we need to draw broader conclusions from all of the texture, like I was saying. But regardless, our next phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major, and we don't modulate straight away, but pretty close to the beginning of the phrase because we have C sharp here, and that's not a secondary dominant, so we're probably going to modulate before it. We have F sharp, D, A, and A. That's D major over F sharp, which is 5/6. D, A. Sorry, then we have this passing seventh here, which we can make the argument that this is a root position 5/7 chord. Really no harm in just saying that because the entire chord is intact. It's not really a chord progression, but the structure of the chord does change. We then have G, B, G, and D, which is our tonic triad, G major, which in the key of D major is also our 4 chord. And then we have this C sharp here, which is sort of a indicator that the modulation's happening in and around it. It's typically before, sometimes after, depending on the context. But this A is a non-chord tone, this A is a passing tone, that C sharp is a passing tone. Take all the notes, including that G, you have A7. It's incomplete, but still an A7 chord, because the only note we're missing is E, and E is our 5th, and that is the tone that provides the least amount of context. And then we get a deceptive progression, B, D, G, and D, which is G major over B, and in this case it's 4/6, and then we have some more passing tones. In A, sorry, we only have one passing tone, and then we have 2 F sharps where the tenor doubles the alto, which is interesting. This F sharp is a 7th, this F sharp is a 7th, but with everything going on, we have A, F sharp, and D. It's like a passing 1/6/4 chord, which I will mark because the bass is moving, 3 of the voices are moving. I feel like the fact that the alto and the tenor doubling one another is pretty significant. And also there is this arpeggiation of D major going on in the tenor, which makes me feel like the chord, this is the arrival point. We then have G, D, G, and E, which is E minor in first inversion, 2/6, and as we get to the cadence, we would expect that. This E is a chord tone, this E is a chord tone, this B is a chord tone, so it's kind of like root position, but we get rid of the third by analyzing it as root position, so I don't really think it's worth it to put it on the page. We then get A, C sharp, A, and E, which is our 5 chord, A major. We have a passing 7th in the alto, the bass just leaps down an octave, and then we have D major, which is our tonic triad in root position, D, D, F sharp, and D. Also worth noting that both cadences have 3 roots and a third. In this case we have root, 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 third, and in this case we have root, root, third, root. This one's an imperfect authentic cadence, this one's a perfect authentic cadence, but the fact that the voices are through their the melodies, or sorry, the voices are structured this way, I think is not necessarily a coincidence. Even though there is a 5th that's being provided by the horn, still the fact that the voices are structured this way is interesting. Looking ahead, we have a half cadence in the key of G major. I think we pretty much modulate straight away because for the same reason this C sharp was leading us in the direction of D major, this C natural is leading us in the direction of G major. So this D major chord here, D, F sharp, A, and D is our tonic in D major, so we don't need to reanalyze, but we will analyze it as our 5 chord in the key of G major with a passing 7th in the bass. We then have B, G, B, and D, which is our tonic triad, G major in first inversion, passing tone in the bass, G, D, A, and D. Tempted to call this A kind of like a suspension, similar to this here, but no, it's actually the G that is our non-chord tone. F sharp, D, A, and D is 5/6, and then we kind of have a cadential progression, G, B, G, and D, which is our tonic triad. A, and C, all of them are non-chord tones. You could call this kind of like a 2/4/2 chord, but I think even though 3 of the voices are moving, the one voice that isn't moving is the bass, which makes the chord progression, or makes it feel like it's not as much of a chord progression. And also the fact that it's going to another tonic triad kind of weakens the fact that, or at least in my eyes, that there's really a chord progression going on. I feel like really this is just a lot of tonic happening over the span of not just 2 beats, but 3 beats, because we get it on the next beat as well in the next measure. So we have G, D, B, and B. It's another tonic triad, no need to reanalyze. This A is a passing tone, this A is a passing tone, this C is a passing tone, and then we get B, D, G, and D. And I'm going to analyze this as 1/6, even though we're carrying over the same Roman numeral because we're on a new line. So that's more of a stylistic thing that I do, doesn't really enrich the analysis at all. It just makes it a little bit more readable. Because, like I said, there is a line break, so there is a break in continuity. If this measure was here, I would have not reanalyzed the Roman numeral, but because it's here, I do reanalyze the Roman numeral. This G and this B right here turn the chord into root position, G, B, G, and D, and keeps the chord intact, so I have no problem marking that. We then have E, E, G, and C, which is C major in first inversion, 4-6. This F sharp is a non-chord tone, and the chord's kind of getting turned into a root position 7 chord here, C, E, G, and B. This B is a passing tone, but we can call it 7-5-3 for the same reason that we called this a 5-3 chord, because the chord's intact. And then our cadence concludes with 5, D, A, F sharp, and A, which is a 5 chord. This cadence kind of has Phrygian half cadence vibes because we're going from the 6th of the scale to the 5 of the scale here, but it's not a Phrygian half cadence because it's not a half step movement in the bass. It's a whole step, E to D rather than E flat to D. Okay, looking ahead, we have a very interesting cadence. A plagal cadence is what I'm calling it, but there might be an argument that something else was going on here as well. But yeah, we're going to be moving to the key of E minor imminently, but we're going to stay in G major for a bit. We go to B, B, F sharp, and D, which is B minor, 5-3, especially after a cadence is relatively common. It's not the most common progression, but it's a little less impactful than a deceptive progression. On the page it looks deceptive, but bear in mind the fact it's happening after a fermata, which means this is a new phrase. We then have E, B, G, and C. That's C major 7 in root position, which is our 4-6-5 chord. Then we have some non-chord tones here. This A is a neighbor tone, this F sharp is a passing tone, this D is an anticipation, and this C, that all spells D7 over F sharp, which is 5-6-5, and that goes to G major, G, B, D, and B, which is our tonic triad in root position, and also our gateway to E minor. It is now our 3 chord. This E and this G kind of turns the chord into a 1-6 chord. Yeah, might as well write that right then there as well. It is contrapuntal. And then we have E, C sharp, E, and A. That's A7 over G. And even though the bass isn't moving, it's happening on a strong metric beat, which is unlike the argument that was being made here, which is where the chord is happening and passing from one beat in the harmonic rhythm to the next. Here, even though the bass is syncopated and being sustained over 2 and 3, a chord is still happening on a strong metric position. This A7 chord over G is not a secondary dominant. It is a harmonization of the melodic minor scale. We have C sharp, D, F sharp, and E here, all outlining E melodic minor. So this A7 chord is 5-4-2, A7 in third inversion. This B is a little passing tone. This D sharp's a little passing tone. We get the same chord on beat 3 and before we get F sharp, D sharp, F sharp, and A, which is D sharp diminished over F sharp, 7-6, 5-4-2, going to 4-4-2, going to 7-6, the 7th resolving down by step as well, is typically how we would expect it to operate. And then we have B here, which is a non-chord tone, F sharp is a chord tone, D natural is a non-chord tone. Oh, apologies, this should be a D sharp. I forgot to make that change in this copy. I should have made that change, but this D is a D sharp. That threw me for a loop there because this B minor 7 chord was very interesting with the cross relations, but no, it was just an error in my MIDI file. But that being said, this is just a B7 chord in root position, 5-7, and 7 going to 5. As I've talked about in past videos, there's not really a progression going on here because the chords have the same function, and the chords don't really introduce too many new tones into the texture. They're only differed. The only difference between the two is in a B chord we have B, and in a D sharp chord we have A. So even in this case, only one new note is getting introduced because we're it would only be introducing one note in the first place, but we're not even getting the B doubled because the A is being carried across the 2. So really this is one long dominant gesture, and the only reason why I'm marking this as a 5-7 chord is because all 4 voices are moving, and that feels significant to me. We then have E, E, B, and G, which is our tonic triad, E minor, in root position. And this is also where I think we move back to the key of G major. It is now our 6th chord. And then we have E, E, C, and A, which does kind of spell an A minor chord in second inversion, but I feel like really just because the bass is leaping up an octave doesn't really make too much of a difference. It's like this, imagine this just being a note that's held over, but this C is a passing tone and this A is a passing tone. This E goes down to D, and then we have F natural, which is very interesting. This F natural actually is intentional. Then we have D and we have B, which is B diminished over D, and that's a secondary dominant. That is 7/6 of 4, but in a very interesting fashion, we don't get, oh no, we do get a 4 chord. What am I talking about? I thought we got an A minor chord here. Never mind, this is not as interesting as I thought it was. This C is a passing tone, this E is a passing tone, this G is a non-chord tone as well, and this C is a passing tone. I thought this was an A minor chord. I misread this ledger line right here. It looked like an A to me, which made it look very interesting, like an A minor chord, but no, this is just C major in root position, so the resolution happens the way we would expect, and we go to G major, G, D, G, and D, or sorry, B, D, G, and D, which is a 5/6 chord. Oh, sorry, a 1/6 chord. Goodness, I am a little scatterbrained after that mistake there. Apologies, I'm glad that I caught it. So this is a plagal cadence. That 4 is also passing, so let's put it in parentheses. Also, this plagal cadence involves the 5th of the chord being in the melody. I think there's an argument to be made that we might have even moved to the key of C major. We have 7/6, 1, 5, 6. That's one way to look at it as well in C major. But to me, it still sounds like we're in the key of G major. At least the melody sounds like G major to me. That F natural really does throw the listener for a loop, though, because it does sound quite interesting. Kind of modal actually. Maybe there is some mixolydian going on here with the F natural, because there are no other Fs going on in this measure, at least up until the end of the phrase. We do get F sharp happening immediately afterwards here, but I still think we're in the realm of G major. There is an argument for C. Okay, so looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G major. We start things off with B minor, B, D, F sharp, and B. That's our 3 chord, and then we have this. It kind of turns into a tonic triad. G, B, G, and D. There might even be an argument that this F sharp is an accented non-chord tone, but I'll leave it in there as 3 because it is the first thing that we hear in the measure. But it wouldn't be the first time that we had an accented non-chord tone as the first note in the melody. Sometimes that's just what Bach does. Moving ahead, we have E, G, G, and C. That's C major in first inversion, 4/6. An anticipation in the alto and 2 passing tones in the lower voices. F sharp, A, D, and C spells D7 over F sharp, which is 5/6/5. And then we have a bit of a cadential progression, G, B, D, and B, which is our tonic triad, G major. And then this E is a non-chord tone. This E is an anticipation. Gives us E minor vibes, but we get rid of the G in the process, so the vibes are there, but the chord is not fully intact. We then have C, E, E, and A. There's the A that I was expecting earlier. A minor over C is our 2/6 chord. Then we have A, C, E, and B. The chord kind of gets turned into root position here, actually. A, C, E, and C. If anything, for a brief moment, I will mark that there because it is relatively uncommon for us to see a 2 chord fully intact after it is re-rotated in a cadential situation. Most of the time we see the 1/3 of the chord get removed and then we never see it come back again, even if it's very brief. I feel like it's interesting that it does emerge here. We then have D, F sharp, D, and A, which is our 5 chord, D major. And then we cadence on 1, G, B, D, and G, which is our tonic triad and root position. And that is today's analysis. I don't really have too much time to debrief to the chorale, but ultimately speaking, this plagal cadence here with the secondary dominant before it, very interesting. Definitely has some modal vibes. and the rest of the chorale, for all intents and purposes, is largely functional, so there isn't too much to talk about there. There is interesting rhythmic profile that will make this chorale memorable from a visual standpoint, but other than that, with all of the contrapuntal activity, take some of the chordal analysis that's in the parentheses with a grain of salt. Your analysis might look different than this, but ultimately speaking, where there is rhythmic consensus on the harmonic rhythm, there really isn't much to discuss. A lot of the chords are pretty no-nonsense. There really isn't much to argue there. But on that note, if you're interested in following me along on this journey to analyze all of the chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Feel free to hit the notification icon. You'll be notified when my daily upload goes live. And this is only episode 220, I believe, or 219. I've lost track. There's more than 200 chorales left to analyze, so there's lots of content in the future. So if you want your daily dose of Bach or your daily fix of analysis, this is the place to get it. Other than that, thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. It means the world to me. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.